Donna de Varona, thank you for letting us having this interview with you, a real legend of sports and, of course, one of the most renowned advocates of female sports globally. So I think we definitely have to talk about the issues lately, and the first question would be how big the danger is regarding this kind of pressure from the transgender lobby, transgender movement on female sports. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I'd say that going into Paris, we've made a lot of progress. 50% of women on the field of play. That's taken more than 50 years. The whole idea of transgender athlete participation in women's sports, or should I say men that identify as women, being able to qualify women's sports, really has become a big hot button issue in the United States and around the world. And I think it started when we got rid of the notion of sex and tried to say gender and sex are the same thing. Mm-hmm. Sex is based on biology. You're male or female. Okay. You have reproductive abilities that men don't have. Gender has to do with the social construct of how you may identify. And what we have a lot of, and it's growing in the United States, is a lot of young people that don't like their bodies, and they feel that they've been born in the wrong body, and they want to have access, especially if you're a young boy and you say you're trans, to women's sports. Now, I really feel you can identify any way you want. You can work any way you want, you can dress any way you want, but for 50 years of progress to be compromised by an individual who's gone through puberty, who's 6'2", like happened in our university system, who says now this person identifies as female and then enters the senior year into the women's category and takes away championships, first places, and forces out the captain of the team because she can't compete against this individual, I think that goes to fairness and in some sports safety. So I'm part of a working group with Martina Navratilova and a 3-time Olympian Nancy Hogshead, pushing back on this and saying, yes, we have to be compassionate, but not at the peril of women who've worked years to get on the field of play.
Absolutely. And this is actually what has been happening, because there is this competitor being born as Will Thomas, yes, as a man, as from the sex point of view. Yeah. And then he identifies now as Leah Thomas, mm-hmm, and he was allowed let me say he was allowed to compete in a females swimming contest in the NCAA even 2 years ago. Winning, of course, many titles, taking away the possibilities of female, biological female from the possibility to become an All-American, to compete in the finals. Mm-hmm. And, of course, in the same time, creating very strange situation by dressing in the same dressing room like they do.
I think the real situation is that there's a very active trans group that's been working for more than 20 years on changing the way we look at sex and gender. Even if you look at all over the world, you say you want gender equity and inclusion. And there's no mention of sex. And I think when you read out the word sex, it puts all women's rights in jeopardy. I also think we should listen to Caitlyn Jenner, mm-hmm, who, as Bruce Jenner, won the 1976 Olympics decathlon, and has said the transgender community has more to worry about than invading women's sports, and it's not fair. And Caitlyn has taken estrogen, has no circulating testosterone in her body now, and says, I still have a sex-linked advantage. Because once you go through puberty, you have a sex-linked advantage. I think the IOC, in order to meet UN relationships and be compassionate, made a misstep. And you've seen them step back, yes, with their rules. And the first rules were, how much testosterone's in your blood. Well, they were allowing 10 nanomoles per liter. The best woman athlete's not even a 1.9.
Yeah.
So then they stepped that back, and so now they've given it to the federations to decide what eligibility is.
Absolutely. That's what happened in 2020, the Tokyo Olympics.
Right.
And that was Lauren Hobart's case,
Yes.
the New Zealander weightlifter. And I think that was definitely something, a sign of a threat for female sports. But that's why IOC took a step back, right?
Yes. Well, I don't only think it was that. I'm part of a working group, and we have a global campaign where we're looking at research done outside the IOC medical committee, because the medical committee is what proposed the first regulations and policy. And now they're saying, well, we have to step back. And I think, to be fair, if the medical committee is going to come out with a research paper, that should be challenged by the outside world that's doing research as well. And I'm not sure, because it's so closed within that community, that that's an option, but I hope so. And I think this global community that's speaking up is a good thing. I think people that are inside the power elite oftentimes are intimidated by this issue because they don't want to be labeled as transphobic or discriminatory, and they want to be fair and inclusive. But if you look at elite sport, I'm not talking about recreation.
Of course. I think it's a very important point to make, so that we have to separate high-profile sport and, of course, professional sport in a way from of course, the recreational one.
Well, you can't self-identify to get into the Olympic final.
Yes.
Sports discriminates, but also sports has accommodated categories, which makes it more inclusive. If you're a heavyweight boxer, you're not going to fight a lightweight, or you might kill that person.
Right.
So categories really work, and we do have models of that. We have Paralympics and Special Olympics, and they do divisioning.
Right.
And that's an option. But the very active trans community, and not all trans individuals or all gay individuals support this, they want it one way. If I identify as a woman, I'm a woman for every reason, and I should compete in elite sport. And I think a lot of the press has fallen on the side of supporting that, and no one has even a balanced documentary on what the cost is for the pipeline for elite women athletes. Because even if I was 10 and I competed against a young boy and I couldn't win, what it would say to me? I'm an inferior human, and I might give up. And we're seeing that. And in countries where we're still very conservative, there's a lot of parents now, and we convince countries in the Middle East that their athletes should compete, will say, as a father and mother, I'm not going to let that athlete in that locker room or in that environment because there are men in it.
Right.
And I don't care if they identify differently. That's how I feel. So we've come so far, and now we're dealing with this infusion of a mentality that is denying sex. We're reading sex out of our lives, and that's dangerous for women.
Very, very dangerous. Of course, you can see that there were some international federations that took very, I would say, important steps forward, like World Aquatics and also World Athletics, saying that there is no place for transgender adults in the competition. Of course, they made this kind of distinction that if a kid would go under this kind of transformation operation before puberty, then they could. Let's not talk about the I would say the health issues of that kind of story, but. So then we should also talk about why NCAA, for example, goes against this kind of decision of the World Aquatics, which, if we are talking about swimming in NCAA and swimming on the global level, that you would believe, you would think, that they should have the same sort of.
First of all, I'm going to go back to the idea that the first policy recommended that you take a substance in order to be eligible for a category of people that identify differently. But a woman can't up her testosterone level to the 2-point or 5-point that a male that identifies as a female has. And the whole purpose of getting rid of doping is to make sure our athletes are healthy and there's an even playing field.
And don't take any substance.
Yeah, so why is there a special category for that? Secondly, in the United States, this goes to politics. Mm-hmm. The Biden administration has been captured by a very liberal group that really don't understand women's sports. And a lot of people don't care about women's sports. Tell me, you know that.
I know.
Trying to get coverage, everything.
Right.
We're just going to sacrifice the women. They should grow up. They're going to learn something from it. That's the Biden administration whispering campaign. And in our educational institutions, those institutions were threatened that their federal money would be taken away if they didn't go with the old IOC policy. And so at that time when Thomas was swimming, UPenn and a lot of schools were nervous. It was a chilling effect from the Biden administration. Yeah. And what's ironic is when Biden was a senator, I set up all his hearings about getting drugs out of sport after the LA Games. And so I don't think he's hearing the message. I do know some has gotten through because under the Title IX regulations that read sex, they've added gender identity as it applies to Title IX in schools, but they have not released their guidelines as it applies to sports. They're going to wait till after the election because we had 500,000 petitions going to the NCAA, copied to the Biden administration about, wait a minute, yes, you should listen to the international federations, which you said you would do. The NCAA said they would do it, but then they had a chilling effect because they didn't want the Biden administration to take away their federal funding that goes to medical research and all kinds of things on campus.
Yeah. Now, so besides those steps and also the petition that you mentioned, now there is a new, I would say, quite brave step for a group of swimmers that they actually sue NCAA for what they have been doing with this issue. What do you think? What could be the outcome of this legal case?
Well, I think they want to go to the Supreme Court and get a reading on sex versus gender identity. And, it's a very complicated system in the United States. It's a big country. I mean, we have over 500,000 elite athletes. What was encouraging was the small group of colleges that mirror the big colleges, the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, which is private colleges and small colleges, banned trans athletes after puberty competing in women's sports, which they would be after puberty because they've gone through puberty. But so the NCAA they just came out with something that was reading both ways, and so did the Biden administration. So after the election, we'll see, because it's now been weaponized as a political thing. Okay.
The Democrats. But do you think this legal case can be jeopardized by I don't know, political decisions?
No, it's very interesting in our legal system right now because there's, is the Supreme Court packed with too many conservatives? What's the status in our Congress, which is very divided? I used to be able to work in the Senate and, we had a lot of bipartisan support. And what's ironic is in the past, the Democrats were always supportive of Title IX. Now the Republicans have grabbed onto this thing and said, we got to protect our women. And yet then there's still this whole addition of, your reproductive rights. Right. So right now in the United States, we sit between reproductive options, which have been closing down in certain states, and field of play. Where are we?
Yeah. So finally, looking at this legal case, if it turns out to be successful from this group of athletes, can set an example for the future, you think?
Well, I think that it's not going to be just one lawsuit. And you see Thomas suing FINA, saying your rules are discriminatory.
He's actually now is going to the European Court of
So you're going to see lawsuits on each side. And, I'm very sad that when the IOC first ventured into this issue, no one was around to say what are going to be the unintended consequences. And so this is like 1,000 cuts all the way across the world. And we'll see. I just hope women step up and men step up for their daughters and say sex is not gender ID. Sex is sex. And we've come a long way. And the trans community could be more compassionate about what this does to the women's category. And I think there are there. We had a conference in Denver where we had 2 trans women stand up and say, I want to do what I want to do. Thank you for understanding me and accepting me. We do not belong in your locker room, and we do not belong competing against you. And many trans individuals see this very extreme campaign hurting them.
Absolutely. Do you think in a most weird case, can it happen that at the European Court of Justice there is going to be a decision made on Thomas' side that will allow him once in history to compete on an international level
I don't know what the European court will do, but Leah would have to then sue U.S. swimming because their rules are conservative, and Leah would have to qualify, and Leah would have to comply by random testing and all the things that everybody else has to do. I'm not sure Leah would make the team. I don't know if Leah would get through our own court system. Okay. So I can't predict what the European court will do. I know the Court of Arbitration already said no. Yes. In other instances. And what's complicated in this is people with DSD or different sex development, like the Castor situation. Right. And here, track and field bent over backwards to try to accommodate, and then realized, wow, we tried to do the right thing, and it's not working.
Yeah. So you're going to the Paris Olympics, finally. So yes. What do you expect from the Olympics there? Of course, we are living in a turbulent times.
Well, I hope it's safe for everyone. I was in Munich when the tragedy happened with the Israeli athletes. This is a very important point for the Olympics, pivotal point. Yeah. We really need, in the U.S. at least, because people are getting turned off. I hope NBC does a great job covering it. I'd like to see them, hire a lot of legends to be visible on the air because people love legends. And I just think it's going to be very competitive.
Yeah, well, one legend will be there, definitely. Donna de Varona, thank you so much for the interview. Thank you.